everyone, it's Alice. Welcome back to another video. Today we're continuing on verbal discrete questions, and if you haven't seen the previous videos with all of my other tips for these type of questions, do check out the link up there. Today we're going to be starting off with the hard section and a double blank question. I want you to keep in mind that when you read any of these questions, you want to only keep in mind the words and ideas in the question. Everything that you need must be written in the question for you to be considering it. Avoid using your personal judgments, especially on certain topics that may be controversial or may have really strong public opinions one way or another. An example of this is saying smoking is bad. Now, obviously, most of the time that is true and we want to avoid smoking, but don't forget that, of course, in the real world, there is a lot of nuance. The question itself can also take an opposite viewpoint. It's really not about what you think or what morality is in the rest of the world. It's really about figuring out what our specific question is talking about. And you'll see that in the example that we have for today, which is this. Human nature and long distances have made exceeding the speed limit a blank in the state. So the legislators surprised no one when, acceding to public demand, they blank increased penalties for speeding. The topic in question is about speeding. So what does the question in front of us tell us? First of all, we have a conflation or an association of human nature and long distances. What we're basically saying here is that both of these things contribute to exceeding the speed limit. Now, it doesn't necessarily say if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but if something is part of human nature, we can assume that it's a natural thing or something that a lot of people just end up doing. Another thing that we also have in this sentence is these two. The legislature surprised no one when acceding to public demand. So essentially what's happening here is that when we're looking at the policy for penalties for speeding, the legislators went along with public demand and they went along with what obviously most people wanted. Now, we don't know exactly what goes in the blanks here, but we can take a guess, right? Based on what is said in the first part and the second part of the sentence, we can take a guess that we're talking about speeding really being associated with human nature, and in the state we also have long distances. The legislators are not surprising anyone, and there is public demand for a certain thing. All of these different parts of the sentence really culminate in a feeling of speeding being almost natural, being something that comes out of just having to go long distances. Again, speeding is routine, it's something expected, and then the second part of this sentence is really saying that policy should reflect that. The reason is because legislators are acceding to public demand, so they're again listening to their constituents, what they're saying, but they're also not surprising anyone. Those two, of course, go hand in hand. Looking at the first blank first, we have three different answer choices, A being a controversial habit, B a cherished tradition, and C being a disquieting ritual. So something that is disquieting is, as you might be able to guess, it's disquieting. So instead of being quiet, it's sort of making noise, producing anxiety, making people feel uncomfortable. If we look at the context of the first blank and the three answer choices, we can get a sense of which one might be the best. first. The first idea is that when you look at these three answer choices, the nouns in them are pretty similar. Habit, tradition, and ritual are all very, very similar words, although, of course, you have a slight difference among them. One thing to note here is that tradition is almost always a positive word. It's something that we say to describe something that we really enjoy doing, that is cherished, that has a lot of value. A habit and a ritual, for example, are sort of neutral words. They can be good or bad, and of course, we hear all the time about trying to cut a bad habit. What we're really looking at here then are the three adjectives: controversial, cherished, and disquieting. You can see that controversial and disquieting are both negative. Both of these, a controversial habit and a disquieting ritual, are saying that speeding is something bad, something that people really don't want to do. The thing is here that because we have the association of human nature and long distances at the beginning of the sentence, it really doesn't align with the feeling of those two combined. Because we're talking about human nature and long distances, we're saying the environment of driving, of speeding, is something that is natural and almost expected because we have to drive so long and human nature just exists. Saying that it's a controversial habit doesn't make sense because there's no controversy here. We aren't talking about why exceeding the speed limit may or may not be bad. It's really not discussing that. And we don't have a disquieting ritual where people are really expressing their ire or their negative feelings towards it. So if we are looking at choice B, a cherished tradition, this gives this blank a lot of a very positive feeling. So something that you really think of fondly and that you really, really like. It feels weird because obviously we generally don't want to speed and we try to avoid doing that as much as possible, but because we have again the association with human nature and long distances, having it be a cherished tradition makes the most sense here. We're not really looking at, again, your personal associations of what speeding is. We're looking at what fits the best into that blank. I think that really is a good example of that. Now, if we move on to the second blank, we have again three different options: endorsed, considered, and rejected. If we go back to what the sentence is about, we're talking about speeding being natural because of human nature and also long distances. It makes sense that legislators surprised no one when acceding to public demand. They blank increased penalties for speeding. If speeding is something that is natural and expected, you would assume that public demand would not want any increased penalties to be passed. And the reason is, of course, again, tied back to human nature and long distances. It's something that is surprising to nobody, and we are really thinking quite positively of these things because we think of speeding as a cherished tradition as shown in blank 1. So if we take that and look at the answer choices, we have endorsed. Endorsing increased penalties for speeding doesn't make sense because that means that you're trying to discourage it as much as possible and try to stop it completely. If speeding is something bad, then we want to increase penalties for it. But again, that doesn't align with what the rest of the actual sentence is. E is considered. They considered increased penalties for speeding. Now, this does make sense, but the reason that it's not the best answer is because it's really a neutral word. It's just saying that these increased penalties were thought about, they were considered, but no judgment was made. That is in contrast to the legislators surprising no one and acceding to public demand. Both of these phrases suggest that the legislators actually took action, actually did something. Simply saying that they considered increased penalties, it's hard to believe that those would be aligned. That makes sense when we look at choice F, which is rejected. So rejecting something, of course, is quite a strong action, and if we reject increased penalties for spending, this aligns with the rest of the sentence where we're talking about speeding quite positively, and it's something that the public doesn't really care about or even expects will happen. Remember, the first blank highlights speeding as a cherished tradition, something not only to be expected, but also to be enjoyed and to be done out of necessity. It makes sense that in blank 2, we're going to say we reject those increased penalties for speeding. So as a recap, keep in mind that, again, you only want to use the words and ideas that are outlined in the question and avoid using your personal judgments. In this example, we talked a little bit about smoking, but also about speeding. So the sentence could be giving you a totally different idea of what you would expect to be there. Just make sure that you don't fall into that trap and you actually use your reasoning and read the sentence before choosing your correct answer. If you're looking for more information on how you can actually implement these tips and tricks into getting a better score on your GRE, please visit alicechengre.com. I have more information about what it's like to work with me. For example, that I was patient and kind, I explained things to Sarah thoroughly and offered examples and tips. With Joshua, I gave him a better understanding of what he should work on to get over that 150 score that he was aiming for. I have more information about how private GRE tutoring works with me. For example, you can choose between writing, quantitative, and or the verbal section. I will give you a customized study plan with session agendas for each time we meet. I can provide sample questions, different study resources, do a content review, go over strategies and examples with you, and as always, I offer flexible payment and scheduling options. Thanks so much for watching!